My slide is visible. Hello everyone. Myself Dhruita Dhamelia. My today's topic is new criticism and theory of depersonalization. This is my personal information. What is new criticism? New criticism is the formalist movement in literary theory that organized in the first half of the century. In new criticism, the texts are considered to be closed. In new criticism, theme applied like you have to read only through text. You don't need to read through past and the personal experience of the poet or whatever the writer or there. You have to focus on the texts which are given in the book or whatever you are reading. Therefore, readers do not need outside sources like a detail about the author to fully understand literary work. In fact, new criticism was the reaction toward the biographical and traditional historical criticism, which focused on extra text material to analyze the text. These resources are taken from Britannica new critics. Who are the critics of the new criticism? The new critics or formalists use a concept known as a close reading to scrutinize the text or to discover the complex relationship between the element of the text and its general theme. Such an element include irony, paradox, ambiguity, metaphor, simile, tension. These all make up the organic unity of the text, which basically means the element of the text work together to make the inseparable whole. According to new critics, the structure and meaning of the text are closely connected and cannot be analyzed separately, since their main focus is on the text itself. They exclude factors like the author's intention, reader's response, and a moralistic bias and historical and cultural context from the analysis. These resources also I take from Britannica. New critics like T.S. Eliot, John Crew Ransom, Clint Brook, and I. Richard, who are the critics of the century. These writers all are particular theorists. Some notable issue they dealt in his theory, like T.S. Eliot dealt with depersonalization and said that the art of criticize literature was becoming more of a science, the distorting the work of its personal flavor. John Crew Ransom talk about the six theory and moral study, biographical study, and synonyms and paraphrase. These studies are vastly different than what new criticism seek to learn by looking at the text itself. T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was a in the new criticism. I want to discuss the idea of T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was an Anglo-American essayist, publisher, playwright, poet, and a literary and social critic of the 20th century. Aside from his contribution to modernist literature, he was also a significant writer of literary criticism. While somewhat introspective and critical of his work, he once said in his criticism just that byproduct of his private poetry workshop. In literary theory and criticism, he said this line: Eliot wrote in peculiar sense, and artistic or artist or poet must inevitable be judged by the standard of the past. Eliot himself implied this concept on the many of his work, especially on his famous long poem *The Wasteland*. Traditional and individual talent. This essay was written by the T.S. Eliot. It was a very famous essay of the 20th century. In this essay, he talk about the people should follow tradition and believe in individual talent. Thus, consider it a milestone in the field of literary criticism and in the 20th century. Eliot aimed in writing his most famous essay, Tradition and Individual Talent, is to emphasize the significance of the link of a poem by a poet or to the other poet by other authors, which was called literary history. But in recent time, term called intertextuality. In tradition, individual talent, T.S. Eliot talked about people should follow the traditional writer who make a history. The writer who wrote not there are type of writer who follow two T, like a timelessness and the temporariness. You have to become like a timelessness type of writer if you want to become a famous and for the many centuries. Theory of depersonalization. T.S. Eliot talk about three things in his essay. First, about the poetry and the relation of poet. Second, the theory of depersonalization, and the third, the why he wrote this essay. In theory of depersonalization, he talk about the poet should remain aloof from the poetry. He or she should not to share his personal view in the work whatever they write. This theory focus on two things: the relation of the poet to the past and the relation of the poem to the author. In the traditional individual talent, there is a one famous line that tradition is not something dead; it is already in living life. In this essay, Eliot told that whatever happened is not a dead. The poet who was died, they are still living in the current author and writers. If they work good and wrote something interesting. Theory of depersonalization was an action of a what is the actually theory of depersonalization is the action of detaching the person self from the something in the context of tradition and individual talent. Depersonalization is the process that traditional poet goes through to make their poetry less personal and more it keeping with Eliot's impersonal theory instead. The poet depersonalized their poetry by working a complex arrangement of common emotions instead of their personal emotion. The poet further depersonalized their work by not using it to express their own feeling and by remaining neutral in the entire writing process. In the depersonalization, their poetry they become more traditional because they are conscious not of themselves but of the whole history of the poetry. When they write, they should aware about the history of the poetry. They should not think about the current situation and the future, but also mention the history and whatever the told into told in the history. As for the first page, he says that the past is never dead. It lives in the present. And if we approach a poet with an open mind, we shall often find that not only the best, but the most individual part of his work. Maybe those in which the dead poets, his ancestor, assert their immortality most vigorously. Again, if he is a great poet, he alters his work in no small scale. So, what is the sort of flowing out and in but while in giving he assert his individuality, in taking his, he has to repress it. The progress of an artist is to continue self-sacrifices, a continual existential of a personality. The Iliad also say that you don't poetry is something to not escape from emotion, but to express not express from emotion, but escape from emotion. You should not express your personal idea or experience. But when I read this essay, I found one example of the our poem we studied, the Wasteland, in which Eliot say that poet should remain aloof from the whatever he say. But if we find that in Wasteland, T.S. Eliot share his view, his own. First of all, we are not aware about the what is we think that it is the historical poem in which he shared the myth and everything. But when we read Elizabeth Pound, then we come to know that it's his autobiographical poem in which he shared that his personal experience with his wife and his uh, lifetime and childhood. So we can say that Eliot himself was not follow his own rule that poet should remain aloof from the poetry or the work of art. But then I read another essay in which I find that Eliot says that if you want to make poetry about yourself, then you have to reveal it in the poem that you are writing, and it's about you. We can conclude that a hidden inner self of the poet, which resemble the details in the poem, depicted Eliot's impersonal theory. It is through myth, allusion, and dramatic monologue, all used as an objective correctiveness, correctiveless, and the Eliot stimulously describe personal suffering and renders it external and therefore impersonal. Eliot succeed in the finding objective expression for the purely subjective. By fusing the impersonal with the mythic, Eliot is capable of a continual self-sacrifice, masking his experience in his person. The voice of the Westland are thus both past and present, personal and universal autobiographical and historical. A poem both richly historical and painfully autobiographical. Thank you. These are my citations.
Okay, Dhruvita, what is your point of view upon the second point of theory of depersonalization? Poems, relation of poems with author's life, or can you find it is a problematic or something?
According to me, if poet want write art is personal choice. Whatever they want to write, they can write. But if they write personal experience, then they can. But they should say in the work that these are their personal experience or what.
Yeah, so Dhruvita, my question is, can you find any work of author that follows Eliot's depersonalization?
The work which followed depersonalization theory. Recently, I am not able to recall any work. If you have another question, then ask.